Because
the
I love
D&D,
this.
but
Okay.
he's
Yeah. Take it
wired
apart.
the money
So
for
of course I didn't get it done.
the
That's hard.
But
Yeah.
So if you need a buy,
mine was Eric's,
I think I would like to buy some like
Okay.
so, and then we bought one in Waynesboro. We will in a few hours.
Talk to Eric.
But you have 45 days
It's
to
like an hour.
identify properties. From when you close on the property that you sell, you have 45 days to identify.
To get something else.
To identify it.
Oh, okay.
Then you have 180 days to buy. But you can identify more than one. I mean, like, even if you only want to buy one property, you can identify more than one.
Okay.
But you have to close on one within 180 days of when you closed on the property that you sold.
Okay. Alright.
So, but, you know, it saves 21%.
How do you say that?
Capital gain.
Oh, okay.
You can just roll money from deal to deal. So one of the Cottonwood agents, kind of agent in name only, mostly for his own stuff, is in his 80s now and has had a long career of building a fortune in real estate. And I was talking with him about this just the other day, and he said, you know, he's been rolling these properties for decades, and never paid capital gains. And when he dies, it'll go to his kids, and his estate isn't big enough to get hit with the estate tax, so they'll never pay tax on it.
Really?
That's it, because it follows you.
Mhm.
You can, if you ever, you know, sell one of those properties and keep the money, you pay capital gains.
Right.
And for us, I mean, we sold property in Rhode Island, and between the state of Rhode Island and capital gains, we were gonna pay like $75,000. And we said, we're not gonna do that. You know?
That little piece of the tax code is a tremendous driver for small investors and small businesses. It makes a huge difference.
How did you use as an intermediator?
Actually, a guy in Rhode Island, that's all he does is 1031 exchanges.
Oh.
And he was very good. And he was very responsive and you know, I had no idea, so he like walked me through all the process and he did a really good job. I would use him again. It was like $1,500, but it was worth it.
Nice.
Well, surely there was an attorney here in Virginia.
That site does a lot.
Yeah, Clark and Bradshaw is real good, and there's there are two guys, Mike Lehman and Mac Nichols, who in Harrisonburg, who are experts. That's mainly what they do. All right, let's get started. And full disclosure we've got three fairly new folks in the room. We are live streaming all of our meetings on YouTube, so you are being recorded. So let me introduce new people. We have Joanne Keeler, who is going to be our new administrative specialist upstairs here. And we have Samantha Reed, goes by Sammy, and she's our new marketing and branding specialist. So Joanne has been doing some training in Harrisonburg with Rebecca and Katie and Elizabeth and Lois, and Sammy the same thing, working with John. She's going to keep kind of the same schedule Amy did, so on Wednesdays, hang out down here and be available for all of you. So today, John Dean's going to be here as well, so if you have marketing or any kind of needs like that, somebody can help you. So,
Just so you know, your predecessor always brought donuts and baked goods to these meetings. Every week she brought them. And she baked them herself.
Lots of butter.
So Joanne's dad is Greg Keeler, one of our Cottonwood agents, so she knows how real estate offices work. You can't get by with that.
It was worth a try.
Yeah.
And then there's Kathy.
Kathy Ballou.
And then Kathy Ballou. Is this your first meeting?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so Kathy Ballou has joined us. Fairly new agent. She was at Keller Williams for 3 months-ish, and decided she'd be better off here. We're thrilled that she did. So welcome.
Here first.
Yeah,
That's right.
I couldn't say that, but glad you did.
I told him.
So we've got our official social. We generally have, each location kind of generally has an official, unofficial each month. And in November, we wanted to make it more of an official thing. So we've got a nice meal planned at Cross Keys Vineyard from 6 to 8. Some folks have been asking about kids. It's a buffet, and the buffet will be set out probably by 6:30. So if you have younger kids, you can get them fed and leave before 8 if you need to.
Are we allowed to bring our spouses?
Yes, please do. Please do. So if you haven't responded, please, and you want to go to that, please let Rebecca know. So we've had quite a saga with our dashboard. The fellow that was our account rep just never seemed to be able to get anything done. So Spencer talked to his boss, and they assigned us a new rep, and our to-do list got done within a matter of hours. So if you use the dashboard, you'll see these changes, which are all good. There's a staging link now, which goes to the current staging site. There is a stock photography button to make it real easy to get to the stock photography we've been talking about for the last few weeks. There were 2 schedule photographs buttons in the resource section, so one of those is gone, and then some things got moved around. But it sounds like we've got a good person as an account rep now, so if you have suggestions or anything about the dashboard that you think would be useful to everybody, just let Spencer know, and hopefully we can get it done quickly. All right, so we talked last week a little bit about seller disclosures, seller's agent disclosures, the difference between adverse fact and material defect. And just as it happens, Virginia Realtors came out with their own little mini PowerPoint on that very thing this week and sent it to all the brokers in the state. So I thought it'd be a really good follow-up. So we're talking about, I think I skipped a slide. Yeah. The required disclosures in our state are the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act and then lead-based paint, which is federal, if that applies. So the Residential Property Disclosure Act lists all these things, and it's called a disclosure act. So a person might think these are things that need to be disclosed. Property conditions, what's going on adjacent parcels, where the sex offenders are, if you're below a dam. But these are things that the act says the seller doesn't have to disclose. The Disclosure Act really is a great big disclaimer that says, hey, in Virginia, it's buyer beware. Seller doesn't have to tell you anything. They can't lie about it if you ask them directly, and they can't conceal it. Can't frame a wall and build it up to cover a cracking block wall in the basement. But they don't have to volunteer any information about any of these things, whether or not they're in a flood zone.
Do you have this, because I always get, this is the summary of rights, the
Mhm.
2-page thing, right?
Right.
And I just go baffling when I have to go over that thing because it's like crazy. So do you have this somewhere else that you can send to us?
Sure.
Okay.
I could just print this as a PDF. Yeah. And interesting, you mentioned the summary of rights. I've recently learned that that is not actually part of the state law. That is a Virginia Realtors form that was created just to help buyers understand how much on their own they were. So sometimes we have differences between firms, who's supposed to sign it, do we need to send a copy back to the seller and that kind of thing. It's not a requirement by law, so if somebody's pushing back on having their folks sign it, it's not that big a deal. So all of these things they don't have to disclose. Really, anything besides these, and I don't understand the tourism activity zone yet, but those first 4 are the ones that have always been listed. These are the 4 things that the law says a seller actually does have to describe. If you're near a military air installation, which would be pretty obvious, I think, at the showing. Whether there's defective drywall in the house, that I've never heard of that being a problem around here. Has anybody? June, have you ever run into that?
Mm-mm.
Defective drywall is a problem in Northern Virginia and Tidewater. For a short period of time, builders were using Chinese drywall, and there was something about the chemical makeup of it that corrodes all the wiring, and it's a big problem. Apparently, the only way you know is if you kind of take off your switch plates and things and look and see if things are all black and corroded. If there are any pending building or zoning violations, which means you've been notified by your locality that you're in violation of something and you haven't fixed it yet, or if you're a meth lab.
So these 4 things would be disclosed on that disclosure that has D4 on the top of it.
Right. Those are the only 4 that would need to go on that form.
Okay.
Yep.
And then this, you don't know.
And then
about
that's,
storage.
I've got to look into that. I hadn't heard of that before. The lead-based paint disclosure, of course, federal law. If the house was built before 78, just tell your buyers to assume it has lead paint in it. because that's what was sold at that time. It's not a problem as long as it's not ingested. So don't allow there to be peeling paint that a little kid could eat. And if you do any renovations and you're creating dust and that type of thing, take
I just
precautions.
make a joke and say, you guys don't plan on licking the walls or chewing on the handles.
Right. Yeah. That's what I used to say. Don't let your kids chew on the windowsill. And,
Yeah.
and it's not a problem. And it's probably underneath several layers of paint by now. But have you run into that in any of your renovations?
No.
Contractors actually have a special set of rules now. They have to seal off the room and all kinds of things if they're
Not
creating dust.
knowingly.
Right.
I'm sure I grew up in a house that had like.
Yeah. I'm sure I did too. Yeah. Okay. So we have the little lead booklet. They have now added into the actual disclosure form. If you send it to your folks online, there's a link. When it mentions the booklet, it'll be a link to that booklet. I think that'll start January 1st.
I always put that booklet in dot loop and then just share it.
Right. That's great. That's the easiest way to do it. Yeah. Of course, if they've had testing or they're the original owners and they still have the paint cans or something like that, and they know that there is lead-based paint, they need to disclose that. So, a couple real-life situations. And watch the wording. A licensee engaged by a seller shall disclose to prospective buyers all material adverse facts pertaining to the physical condition of the property, which are actually known. So we're not have questions yet. That's the rule for us. Sellers don't have to disclose. We have to not only material defects, but that broader category of adverse facts, which could be outside the property if it affects the physical condition of the property.
Beyond the four corners, the four corners.
It could be, right. Like in one of the examples from last week, just outside I guess that was on the property. There were vultures nesting in a tree. Is that a material adverse fact?
So
It was.
outside,
Well, the answer from the attorneys was it probably depends on how big the parcel is. If it's a quarter acre, then you've got a tree full of vultures, probably so. If it's 10 acres, maybe not. So it could be that broad.
Take it, baby.
So material is something that could affect the decision of a reasonable person about whether to buy. But everybody's kind of got their own definition of
There's
reasonable.
some unreasonable people.
So that's why it's kind of gray sometimes and why it could be so broad, like birds in a tree. Something is an adverse fact if it's negative and true. So when we are talking about the physical condition of the property, and that comes into play sometimes. So our responsibilities, is it material? Is it an adverse fact? Does it affect the physical condition of the property? And do we actually know it for sure? Rumor doesn't count. Rumor from a neighbor often happens. And unless somebody can prove something. Anybody had that happen? Neighbor come over and tell you something bad about your listing or the house you're looking at?
No, my neighbor came over after we lived in the house 13 years and said, your house was flooded in Camille or something. I said, you're telling me now after I've been here 13 years?
Mm-hmm. My very first buyer ever. RPAC donation. The buyers, we were under contract. The house was vacant. The buyers went out to just walk around and look and show their kids and think about how wonderful it was going to be. The neighbor comes trotting over and says, I'm a structural engineer and I got to tell you this house is sinking.
Oh my God, that was
Yep. And of course they freaked out. The seller had already moved. His company had paid a bunch of money to move him. The seller ended up paying $12,000 to have huge pins driven into the earth and then attached to the house to not lose the
Oh
deal.
my
Yeah.
gosh.
Keith was the listing agent,
Oh, wow.
which was great. I mean, if it had been somebody from another firm, it would have been a nightmare, but at least we could work through it. So, okay, here's the question and answers. The seller told me that the roof is leaking in multiple places and the living room carpet is regularly soaked during rainstorms. Must the seller disclose this condition on the residential property disclosure statement?
Yes.
no.
Buyer beware.
It's 2-1, more votes.
I think if they'd said it out loud, they should disclose it.
Well, we do it for basements, why would we do it for a,
Yeah,
On the residential property disclosure statement.
The agent.
that's
There's
the
only
one
4
that says
things
D4.
that would
So
need to
no,
go there.
they don't
Right.
have to.
No, they don't have to. If we know about it, we need to disclose it. So we could put it in agent remarks, or make sure you mention it to an agent before showing. The easiest thing is to put it in remarks.
Okay, so
But
put-
the seller doesn't have to disclose that.
okay.
Whoa. Okay. For efficiency, should the listing agent disclose material adverse facts pertaining to the physical condition of the property on the residential property disclosure statement?
No, it's just the seller.
No. Right. Again, we wouldn't put that on there. Now, we know, again, if we know them, we have to disclose them, but the seller doesn't. And we generally don't want to scare people away by disclosing them in
Okay.
public remarks. You can disclose them in agent remarks, and then it's the buyer's agent's responsibility to explain what's going on. So, question comes up, does the seller really have any disclosure obligations at all? Isn't the residential property disclosure statement just a list of disclaimers?
I sort of agree with that.
Mm-hmm. But do they have any at all?
Well, they have those 4
They
things.
have those 4.
Or 5 now,
Right.
the tourism.
Yeah, 4.5 till we figure that thing out.
I
But-
don't know, I'd rather be honest, I don't know. It's
So,
hard
well,
to
but here's the deal. We all this is the law. The sellers don't have to disclose it, but we do, in part because it's the right thing to do, and we all know if you address these things early, you have a much better chance of the deal actually going through than if you wait for an appraiser to find it and spring it on somebody, or the lender to call and say, oh gosh, we're in a flood zone. Why didn't anybody tell you about that? The later in the transaction you find out bad news, the greater the chances it's going to blow up. So I think we all know as a matter of practice, the best thing is to tell our sellers, you know what, I have to disclose this. If you're not going to fix it, we just need to address it up front and let folks account for that in their offers. And you got to be willing to account for that in your counter offers too.
Right.
And depending on what it is, they may be better off to do that. Or they may be better off money-wise and length of time on market-wise to go ahead and fix it.
Mhm.
So there's our 4. Military-based, effective drywall, neither of which I think apply to us. Zoning violations or meth lab.
Meth lab would, yeah. Seems to be the case.
And like any other defect, I guess that's it. If it was a meth lab and it was remediated and approved by the EPA, then you don't have anything to disclose. Just like if you fixed a leaky roof or a leaky basement. So, any questions about that? It can get pretty broad. So we had a really good, and the Harrisonburg Association does Affiliates Day, where they invite all the affiliates to have kind of a trade fair, and then there's CE all throughout the day. And so we had 3 really good classes there. One of them was on contract issues, and Laura Farley did the class. She just kind of took it right through the basics. And on the surface, it kind of seems very basic, but we know in real life it can get kind of complicated. She started off by saying, and she said many, many times throughout the class, the most important thing is to read the contract. That's one of her most common answers on the legal hotline when people call with issues is, what does your contract say? And a lot of times the answer is in there
That's what Karen
if we're
says
careful
too.
about reading it.
I said that's what Karen says too when I was training.
Oh yeah, right. So we need offer. To form a contract, we need offer, acceptance, and delivery, right? So the offer is somebody proposing some terms. The acceptance is the other party agreeing to those terms. What's delivery?
Completed, maybe.
Completed and signed.
Ratification.
Delivery back to the last person who made the counteroffer. Could be physical, could also be just communicating. that you've done it. So if you think you're in a competitive situation, your folks sign, you call, text, email the other agent and say, hey, we've accepted your offer, I have a ratified contract, and it's on its way to you. And that communication constitutes delivery. And the other party, say if they had a better offer coming in, couldn't withdraw their counteroffer. The guy who used to be the VAR attorney, Len Marshall, would talk about, or would teach people, if you think you're in a competitive situation where you may have an offer in on a house, but somebody else is going to make another offer, so the sellers may want to withdraw their last counter to you, but your folks have signed and you see that other agent's number pop up on your phone, you pick up the phone and the first thing you say is, we've accepted your offer, we have a ratified contract. Before he can tell you, we withdraw.
Oh,
What about like text messages and emails?
Those count.
Same thing.
Yeah. And the best thing is to do multiple. Send them a text, leave a voicemail if you can't get them on the
Yeah.
phone.
Yeah, Minnie taught me that, all three.
Yeah. And then there can be no doubt that you communicated. So everything in Virginia, everything must be in writing or it's not binding. There's a thing called the statute of frauds that says any agreement that is reasonably expected to affect one of the parties for more than a year, basically, has to be in writing. So the weird thing is, if Bruce and I agreed on the terms of a sale, I'm buying one of his investment properties, we have a contract. It's just not enforceable. I couldn't take him to court and make him sell the house to him unless it was in writing, which is a weird kind of place to be. And it allows one party, usually the seller, to break a binding, but well, not binding, but a ratified contract that's not written yet, to take a better offer. I'd say this year it's probably happened once or twice a month. It's because things are so crazy and there are always multiple folks looking at houses. We'll get something done verbally for whatever reason, and get an agreement, and then before you know it, the listing agent's calling back saying, I'm sorry, but we got a better offer and we hadn't written it, we hadn't signed yet. So important to get everything written as quickly as you
I had that
can.
happen on the other side, and that's why I have hanging above my desk, time is of the essence.
Yeah.
Because I represented the seller, the buyer gave us an offer, we countered, and they hadn't signed, and we got another offer in before they returned it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when Minnie said, send them an email, send them a text, and call,
Right.
leave a voicemail.
Right.
And we got out of it. I mean, not got out of it, but we sold to the others.
Right.
And the people lost. And it was because their agent dragged her feet on getting them to sign.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the next day and she hadn't had them sign.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it was like, do it now.
Yeah. I mean, and when you think about that impact on that family, it's
exactly.
really important that we don't dawdle when we got those kind of situations. Stuff is so competitive now. I've told you guys probably before, when I was selling, you take somebody, there was 6 months supply in the market at any time of the year. You take somebody to a house. If they liked it, well, let's make an appointment for a second showing. You always see different stuff. And then if you like it, we'll look at some comps and think about making an offer. And there was no rush.
No time thing there.
And you guys have to deal with a much different situation. Is an earnest money deposit necessary for contract formation? Does the buyer have to give something? No. No? Good. Most people say yes. The mutual promises are the consideration that you need. It was great to hear, we've done this when needed, but it's great to hear Laura confirm that this is okay. So if we mess up and turn in an earnest money deposit late, any amount of time is okay as long as buyer and seller agree, and she confirmed that agreement could actually be after the fact. So if I mess up and wait 8 days to get the thing deposited and get an amendment signed by the buyer and seller saying that earnest money deposit shall be made within 10 days of ratification, so now I'm within my time frame, that's okay, as long as the buyer and seller are cool.
And you can do that after the 5 days.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But you have to do an extension, right?
You have to do it. Yeah, you have to write. So just one line amendment. That's all you need.
I was gonna wire our EMD to North Carolina.
Mhm.
Get this, they wouldn't take it.
Because it was a wire?
I had, so I
And the physical
had to
check.
get, well, yeah, we wrote a check, to the daughter, and all that, and so she went down. But it was crazy. I said, you won't take a wire? And nope.
They probably wouldn't take cash either.
Yeah,
So just a check.
yeah,
That's crazy.
yeah, it's crazy. I don't wanna sell those days, North Carolina.
It is different.
Yeah,
Yeah. Can a buyer's agent use a contract or an offer that they're submitting to increase their own commission?
no,
Why not?
because it's between the broker and the, seller.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing to do with the buyer.
And
We can
you're both
decrease-
right.
We can decrease our commission.
It just depends on how it's happening.
Yeah,
So
that happened a lot.
they cannot ask for a different split of the commission. So if they find out, say it's a 6% commission, 3.5 to the listing firm, 2.5 to them, and that makes them mad, they can't write into the contract that it's going to be 3 and 3. Because, like June said, that's an agreement between the seller and the listing firm. What they could do is say they have a buyer's agreement that says they're going to get paid 3%. Listing firm's offering 2.5. They could propose in the contract or ask that the seller agrees to pay that other 0.5%.
That's hard to do that.
Yeah, and it still puzzles me a bit, and I must have gotten distracted. I didn't ask her in class, but it puzzles me a bit how in an agreement between, I guess because it's between the buyer and the seller,
Because you're bringing the buyer.
and so you're basically just asking the seller to pay some of your closing costs, which are that extra, that missing commission. And that's okay, but they can't monkey with the agreement that the seller's made with the listing firm. I'll skip over that legal outline for just a minute. Fixtures. I think we talked about fixtures not too long ago. There have been some really interesting situations that came up. One of them that was talked about didn't have to do with a buyer and seller arguing over fixtures, but an appraiser had done an appraisal on the house. The house had solar panels, and the appraiser gave no value for the solar panels because she said they were personal property, and the seller could take them along when they moved.
No.
Right. Most people in the room disagreed with that.
Because it's tied into the electrical system. Then.
Right.
It's attached.
Right. It's attached. Kind of the legal rule of thumb is it's a fixture if you need a tool to remove it. So it certainly qualifies that, right? Also, as part of the electrical system, and the electrical system has to work at closing. So if it can't be removed for that reason. So she mentioned that just to illustrate how much of a debate this can be. So if there is any doubt in your mind, just make sure it's in the contract. If your seller wants to take something with them, and anybody, reasonable or not, could think that is a fixture, make sure it's in the contract if they
I
get to
have
take
this
it.
question. So if you disagree with an appraiser and you know that it's through you represent the buyer and it's usually the seller fighting against the appraiser. But if it's something that you feel like they're saying something about the solar panels that would help your buyer, but my question is can you recommend a different appraiser?
Mm-mm.
Because they're the
They can't
ones.
choose. The banks
Yeah,
can't
we
The
can
choose.
choose.
banks don't even choose it.
Right, the banks have to use a third-party company. They can choose who's in the rotation,
Mhm.
and we have talked to some of our favorite lenders about appraisers that we don't want in the rotation,
can
and they can do
blacklist
that, yeah,
Yeah.
if somebody's always a problem. But case by case, really the buyer has to appeal to get the lender to order another one, but that doesn't happen too much because the buyer is basically saying, hey, please make me pay more.
Yeah, no, I just
So-
wondered.
Yeah, you can submit comps, but it's pretty rare that it's successful.
Okay, I just wondered about it.
So yeah, fixtures. If your buyer wants something and there's any doubt at all, make sure you write it in. Things like brackets for TVs. If I could pick that TV up off the bracket or undo something with my hand, The bracket's a fixture, but the TV is not. Light fixtures are a big problem. I've probably told you one of our most famous stories. We were on both sides of a transaction in Massanutten. Everybody was super happy. Closing was great. Buyers walk into the house, and in the dining room, there's bare wires hanging from the ceiling. And the seller said, well, I always planned to take that. We bought it in whatever foreign country, and it's really special to us, but you never mentioned it. So the agents bought a light fixture.
How about a shelf? Like in my dining room, I have a shelf over the doorway
Mm-hmm.
that I have special plates on.
Mm-hmm.
Is that shelf attached? I mean, there's
How's
a
it mounted?
screw, and then you just put the thing in. You know how it's attached to the wall. I mean, I can lift it up, but then there's screws there. That
Mm-hmm.
is that considered?
Most people don't
Probably,
listen.
if you wanted to get really technical, if you could just lift it up, it's not a fixture, but the screws are. 'Cause
Yeah.
they're the mounting.
Oh, I'll leave it with
But
that.
yeah.
Take a
But-
picture of it and ask the other agent, is it okay with your folks to take it?
Yeah, that's the best thing, is just to
Yeah,
make sure
that's a
anything
good
that could
idea.
be vague is addressed if it's important. Home inspections, we've talked about this before. It bugs me when people put home inspections for informational purposes only, and then they attach the regular addendum. Or they put it for informational purposes only, but buyer reserves the right to get out. It's not really for informational purposes only if you want some kind of contingency. So, and the point Laura made was, in our contract, it says that anything handwritten or typewritten that conflicts with the pre-printed stuff, the handwritten wins. By that same principle, any addendums that attach override anything they conflict with in the contract, even if it's a handwritten thing. So if I type in remarks, inspection is for information purposes only, and then put in our regular addendum and don't do anything to change that, then the buyer has all the rights that they normally would. So if that's what you really intend, the easiest thing to do is to say, if you want that right to get out, is to attach the addendum, but just eliminate option one, which is we're going to present a punch list. So the buyer's only choice is to terminate or move forward, which is what you really want. If you really want it to be for informational purposes only and tell the seller you're all in, then you can just write that in the contract, or even just check the box that says we want a home inspection, because the contract says if you want a contingency, see the attached addendum. So if there's no addendum, there's no contingency.
I
I didn't
put
follow
a dollar
that
bill.
at Oh, okay.
What part messed
Well, I
me
mean,
up?
so wait a minute, we have in there where they want a home inspection, it's like on page
Mhm.
4.
Mhm.
So you're saying if we attach or we include a home inspection contingency, what does that mean then? I mean, then where it says, we're gonna have it done within
Mhm.
15 days and then you have 5 days.
Right.
So we don't attach that or we do attach?
Well, it depends what you want to do. If the conversation started with home inspection for information purposes only,
And who's saying that? The seller?
the buyer, and they're making their offer saying, hey, we're not going to hit you with a punch list, it's for our information only, but we want the right to get out if we find something horrible, which is most of the time what they want. So in
Okay.
that case, I'm suggesting check the box, we want our home inspection, attach our regular addendum, but cross out option one, which
Where
talks
we
about a punch list.
Okay.
So the buyer, the way it reads, the only choice would be we're going to terminate or we're going to move forward.
Do you ever have buyers that say they're never gonna give a punch list? I've never.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
If it's competitive,
As in homes.
Oh, okay.
yeah, if it's competitive, they'll start waiving those rights pretty quickly.
Hmm.
Especially if, walking through the house, there's no apparent concerns,
Okay.
So then, to jump back up to this Virginia Bar Association legal hotline, this is a pretty cool thing. I can't say I've ever used it. She's mentioned it before. And I've had situations where I wish I would have remembered it. But what this is a hotline set up by the Virginia Bar where you can talk to an attorney for 30 minutes for $35. So if we're in a conflict of some kind, and I'm saying to you, you're saying to your clients, you probably ought to talk to an attorney about this if you're thinking about terminating or if you're thinking about doing X, Y, Z. And they don't want to pay $150 to go talk to somebody for an hour. They can pay $35, talk to somebody for 30 minutes, and then at the end of that, they can decide if they want to extend for more time.
So that's for
Or for
clients.
For clients, yeah, we could use it too, I'm sure. And
Isn't it free for us? I mean,
This has nothing to do with the Realtors Association. This is
Oh,
the Virginia
okay.
Bar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you call the 800 number. They ask you what type of issue you have and where you live. So in theory, they match you up with a local attorney who is knowledgeable in whatever area you want.
So if you wanted a divorce, you could call there and they could give you
Yep. So yeah, next time you're arguing with somebody, try it and let us know how it works.
I'll give that to my husband, maybe he'll divorce me.
If he hasn't by now, I think you're safe.
I know, I'm trying awfully hard too.
So this is what Bruce was mentioning. The Virginia Realtors Legal Hotline is a wonderful thing. If I don't know the answer, Karen doesn't know the answer, you can't get a hold of us, you've got a question, they are fanatical about responding to these calls. They have, among their lawyers on the team, they just have a rotating schedule of who's on duty, and that person, it's almost like they're competitive about it to see how quickly they can get back to people. So their average now is an hour and 20 minutes in returning the call to you. You go online, type out your problem. I get a copy of the question, and then they will call you back. They don't email you back. They'll call you and talk about whatever your issue is. And they're just super, super helpful. This used to be something that was only available to brokers, and now it's available to any agent.
So why does it say can't take on any agent as a client? What does that mean exactly?
They cannot act as, if I'm talking to Laura, she can't act as my agent
Oh, okay, gotcha.
and represent me.
Okay. They'll refer
They'll talk in general terms,
Gotcha.
about whatever your situation is. All right, yeah, we'll skip through that. We'll hit that next week. I was a little overambitious with the agenda. So the Senior Santa email went out yesterday. If any of you would like to participate, just reply to that email. And I will be back here on Friday, so I'll bring the tags down then. It's a great, great project. Is there anything, do you do that down here? I know their footprint is still down here. Yeah, but I think Home Instead is their footprint is down here as well. Your association
We do through GAR.
might hook up with them. Yeah,
We give socks and stuff like that.
okay. For the same organization?
It's through GAR, Augusta County, someone through
Okay.
Augusta County. I can't remember the exact
Okay.
organization that we have.
Nice.
And normally I would say yes, but I have so much going on, I don't think I could do that right now. Because they have to be in November 21st, right?
Right. So let me get to our website. Who's got listings they want to talk about?
Well, I just relisted Miller Road again,
What's this house number?
to be determined, this
Oh.
land.
Okay.
It's in a great location.
Why isn't that selling?
Well, I mean,
Can you offer it to a builder or something?
they don't want a bunch of houses, that one right there, 200. They don't want a bunch of houses across the road from them. They don't want to divide it more than 10-acre parcels. So, because
How much is it all total?
We originally started with 45 acres, and it was listed for 450,000.
Mm-hmm.
So, they also, there's a White House you can kind of see on that's
Right there.
far there.
Mm-hmm.
They're the owners, and then the brick house is the other owner. And this was a Christmas tree farm, and they have a pasture. The pasture is what is for sale. And when you look it up in Bamanet, it's 64.678 or something like that for the total parcel, because there's some across the other road of the road. So they will sell more or they will sell less. So it's just
Okay.
they're open to whatever someone would be interested in. And there's been people that have looked at it to buy it for houses. We were under contract in August, and these people got cold feet. And they were buying it together as a family, and they had a dispute about what to do with the land. And so,
So is it this?
yes, it's all of that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a stream that goes through it. That's what that dark part is. Up, all the way up to the trees and way over up behind the house.
So which street is that off of? Is that off of 254?
You've got Long Meadow Road, and then you've got Kidsville Road. And
Oh,
it's
okay,
the road
gotcha.
that goes in between. So it's Basically, it's Fishersville, but it's got a Waynesboro address.
You want to call
Okay.
AJ Sipe, Jody Sipe's husband, or call Jody,
Okay,
because they live out there and he builds.
okay, yeah, and they're negotiable, so.
Okay.
that's kinda-
Who else? Nothing? Wow. Upcoming listings?
I have one, 265 McBridge. It's in Swope.
Pretty.
It's 280. It's gonna be 285. It's 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, huge swimming pool, 5 acres. What's the address? 265 McBridge. It's BRYDGE. They're in the process of staging it now. Monica's already been there, told them what to take out, what to leave. And now they're just, so they're in that process.
Yeah.
But if somebody has somebody that's interested, we can make a special exception and get them in there. The listing's active, but not active in the MLS until we get the pictures,
Okay.
which should be next week.
I have another one coming on Augusta Avenue in Waynesboro. It'll be listed at 135. It's 1,000 and something square feet. It's been redone. It's he bought it cash. He's one of my investors, and flipped it, and it looks really good. So he's just doing some touch ups so he can get it ready to list next week. So
What's the
What do you
street
think?
it's on?
it's on Augusta Avenue in Waynesboro.
Where is that?
It is, you know where Bath is?
Yeah.
It's one right up from
Okay.
Bath. So,
You have
but
a price yet?
135.
135.
Yeah.
And if anybody's not familiar, they should go by Bath at Christmas time, because there's this little teeny tiny house that has all these lights programmed
Yes.
to a radio.
Yeah, the radio
Oh,
station.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
There's
it
the
just
kids
blow
love
your
it.
mind. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
They play Drummer Boy, and
Yeah.
it's pretty cool. And it like goes to the beat
With
of
the
the
music.
drums.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Like the lights. It's cool.
He's probably putting the lights out now. He probably has to start at
Mhm.
Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Okay. Have a great day. Thanks for
you,
being here.
Paul.
Thank you.
So Spencer will be here, Sammy will be here, and have you heard from John? He may be
I've
upstairs.
seen him.
Yeah, okay.
He's doing something.
He's been, I have my, I don't know if you have time today, but I have my back upstairs if you could put it to the.
Yeah.